Welcome to the last session of the day. We have with us an incredible panel today, and thank you guys for being part of this. We have Kate Fullam from East End Food Institute. She's the executive director over there. Robert Budd in an awesome jacket there. I want the same color for myself. He's the CEO of Free. Lauren Wagner, the executive director of the Long Island Arts Alliance, and Theresa Regnante, which I think everybody knows, the president and CEO of United Way. So once again, thank you everybody for coming. If anybody has questions for the panel, please just drop them into the chat, and I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. But before we get started, if people want to spend about a half a minute introducing themselves and telling a little bit about your agency. So Robert, why don't we start with you? Great.
Good afternoon, all, and happy to be here. Love that Ken and company provide this wonderful opportunity for all of us. We are a multi-funded organization providing services for differently abled children and adults. We span the lifespan, and we have most of our services through the Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities, the Office of Mental Health, and the Department of Health throughout Long Island and in 4 of the 5 boroughs of the city.
Awesome. On the other side of the spectrum, Kate, you want to tell?
Hi, I'm Kate Fullam from East End Food Institute. I've been the executive director here for a little over 3 years, and we support, promote, and advocate for the local food system here on Long Island. We make products for farms. We get products into the schools, local food, and back to the food pantries as well. So working boots on the ground to make a better food system.
Great. Theresa?
Hi, good afternoon. Theresa Regnante, and the president and CEO here at the United Way of Long Island. I've been president here for now 12 years, and we've done a fair amount of work over that time in a new space for training and education, and have probably now about 5,000 direct clients connected to the United Way of Long Island and all its programs, and we still very much value the partnership and the network of the more than 100 organizations that we fund with a variety of programs and projects throughout the region.
That's awesome. And Lauren, represent the arts and cultural groups.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lauren Wagner. I'm the executive director of the Long Island Arts Alliance. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Long Island Arts Alliance was formed in 2003. Our mission is to provide vision and leadership to support the thriving and diverse arts community across Long Island. We do this through initiatives that engage and promote the arts through Nassau and Suffolk counties that benefit our local artists, our arts organizations, our public schools, and our communities. In addition, we serve as an advocate for arts education in our public school sector. And today our membership boasts over 120 of the island's arts and culture organizations, ranging in geographic location, range of disciplines, and budget size. I'm super happy to be here.
So awesome. Everybody kept it under 30 seconds, so I really appreciate that. So let me just start off by firing the first question, and hopefully we'll get some from the audience. So I think 2020 will go down in history of one of the most interesting and significant years. The COVID pandemic, Black Lives Matter movement, some of the polarization that's happened within the country over the presidential election and other issues. What do you see as the most significant outcomes of 2020, and how do you think they're going to shape your organization moving forward? Who wants to field that one first?
I could jump in there.
Go ahead, Kate.
That's a brave one. Well, there is an unprecedented focus around food systems resiliency at this time. I've described it recently as one of those tornado booths where the dollars are all just flying around and you're trying to grab all of them. For a small organization like East End Food Institute, we're under $750,000 a year. And we're the boots on the ground. We're trying to gain those dollars that are available to invest in the infrastructure that we need to be able to scale up and really build resiliency within the local food system. And what that means is shifting from direct service to building resiliency and solving the problems behind how we got to an emergency in the first place. So I think that there seems to be, at least in food, a focus shift from urgency to solving the problems behind those urgent issues.
Okay. Theresa, you want to add anything?
Sure. So I think in any disaster, and and this certainly extraordinarily world event, the pandemic, and then in addition having the Black Lives Matter movement and a very, very big focus around the country with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've taken a real hard look at our impact in the space of DEI as a system, and for the United Way worldwide, as well as certainly the United Way of Long Island. So there are 1,700 United Ways in the country, and probably another 200 organizations, United Ways around the world, and we've all recommitted a keen focus on our diversity, inclusion, and equity work. So for Long Island, we'll be embarking on a journey. We have started. We've taken a very serious look both at the board of directors, our community impact council, the investments that we make, the tools that we use for those investments, the organizations that we're funding, the impacts that they're making, and we will come up with a different strategy and a different measurement in relationship to making sure the resources that this United Way has are open, if you will, to people and to individuals who haven't really been a part of our journey so far in 55 years. So over the past summer, it's really still a week or two, but we have about 20 new partnerships with organizations who we are now included and invited into a variety of the work and programs and projects that we are a part of on the ground. So I think that the most important thing that we've learned from 2020 and all the challenge is how do we stay as an organization relevant to all people on Long Island, and it's a recommitment to those goals and values.
Lauren, you want to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that COVID, at least personally, taught me was that we need the arts to connect more than ever. It goes down in history. Arts always follow some sort of tragedy or catastrophe, and the lockdown and social distancing, they made evident the importance of arts and culture for people's mental health and well-being. Our sector pivoted. They brought programming online. They offered content for free because there was a need. There was a demand for that content. It's something that I'm super proud of in the sector. At the same time, we have been second only to tourism, the hardest hit industry and sector across the board, arts and culture. So for Long Island Arts Alliance, and like Theresa and Kate have said, we took an opportunity to look inward and say, okay, we're the Long Island Arts Alliance. What can we provide to our members right now? And we went and directly asked them. We said, what can we do? Knowing that we're not a funding organization, what can we do to help you? And through those conversations and the surveys that we put out, we learned so much about the struggles and the challenges that we were able to build a plan moving forward now to be able to communicate not only the economic impact of the arts, but also the social and emotional impact, and build and form ways in which we can assist our member organizations and the sector at large. And that wouldn't have been able to be possible without slowing down and just taking a minute to actually listen to those organizations that were in the hardest hit communities. So I think the pandemic has taught us more about who we are as a sector and what we can provide moving forward as we look to recover.
I think that's important. Robert?
So much of what we do is in the context of many governmental regulations and multiple bodies of oversight. And so we really experience something that we've been talking about for decades now, but in particular have focused intensely on in the last 5 years on both the national and statewide level. And that is the fragmentation of the systems rather than the unified vision of serving an individual who might need access from different sources of support. And so that really became exacerbated during a crisis where you had either no guidance or conflicting guidance from different groupings of government bodies. And I am heartened this morning there's some listening forums occurring on those oversight bodies to try to help remedy that moving forward. So I think that is something, there's always an opportunity in the crisis, so we're trying to really seize the sensitivity that most people are experiencing, whether they were on the provider or service side or on the oversight and regulatory side. And the other piece is that the DEI movement is very much part of who we serve on a daily basis, but also primarily who does the supporting. And nationally, 65% of our workforce are in particular women of color. And so the psychology of oppression that has burdened our field from its inception was also just painfully heightened during the pandemic. And we are also trying to make sure that we don't lose that focus, because that is so critical to our ability to innovate and to be successful moving forward. When you see people who are differently abled as less than fully human, you automatically devalue the people who are supporting them.
So in a follow-up question to, I think, something, Theresa, you and both Robert touched on, obviously diversity has become much more of a topic of discussion. Again, I've heard from a lot of funders that that's something that they're going to continue to emphasize in some of their funding in order to help change and shape policy going forward. What can nonprofit organizations do, or what should they be looking to do at this point to try to increase or change the picture of what they look like as organizations? Theresa, you want to start with that?
Yeah, well, I could tell you what we've done, and it's not that anybody needs to follow our path, but the first thing we had to do is come up with a statement for the organization and to publicly post the statement, which might seem like, oh, well, that's easy to do, but it's not so easy. We have a board of 50 people. We have a marketing communication committee. We have a lot of individuals that expect us to be very thoughtful in crafting not only the statement, but how to implement the statement. So for this United Way, developing and maintaining a publicly post and the organization's position opposing all racism is very important. Providing racial and equity training annually, both to our board and staff, equally important. And developing and using, racial equity as one of the criteria for prospective community investments and partnerships is really important. So then we have, under that, a pretty thoughtful paragraph on implementation and what that means. And for our organization, we are embarking on a 21-week equity challenge. So it's going to be a 21-week equity challenge that people can join by social media. And each week we will have a topic, and we've got Elaine over at Erase Racism working with us on all the content, as well as Daniel Lloyd over at Minority Millennials, and we've done a lot of work with Daniel throughout the last year and a half. And we will, this will be a very public platform. We'll have monthly chats about the information, and we'll invite all the not-for-profit sector to be a part of that 21-week challenge. And our hope is you'll take our content and then create in your own networks your 21-week challenge or your 21-day challenge, and use the content and go forward and try to get as many people as we can mindful and have a perspective that is a little bit broader. And that's our interest. And I think that will also be our responsibility to work with groups like the Regional Economic Development Council, the HIA, the LIA, a lot of different groups to implement and to take our content and do these sort of 20-minute segments weekly and have conversations. So I think the more that we could do that throughout, individuals, businesses, labor, the not-for-profit sector, education sector, I think I think the more mindful we will be for our future and for the policies that are before us.
Theresa, when you start to develop that and you have definitive dates and stuff, please get it out to us and we'll kind of share it with the nonprofit community and even the for-profit community if you want them on board too.
Yeah, our 21-week challenge will start in August, starting with Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, commemorating his speech, and it will end on his birthday in February. So we will take the 21 weeks and go through that time, but we'll make sure we get you all the links and all the information. We've got the first 6 weeks set, and we'll move from that point.
That'd be great. It also seems like we lost Robert. So either he was disinterested in this or technical
I would say something, just from the other end of the spectrum, and I'm sure that Lauren can follow this up. Without a marketing and communications team and, internal resources to set up these wider challenges, which are so important for organizations to gather around what the United Way is doing, internally don't feel like a failure. You can do something, right? And what I did with our board at the beginning of, all of the race relations issues coming up, I just sat down and made time to talk with each of my staff members and board members and just see what they were thinking and feeling and how we as an organization and me as a leader, how they could feel more supported and heard, and communicate that in the bigger group as well, what I was hearing, how can we talk about this together? When you have a smaller team, there is the luxury of that community building in a more one-to-one and small group way. So I would encourage, both sides of that. And Lauren, as a party of what's on the staffing side.
Yeah. So as a party of one, I've had to take things into my own hands a bit. I've discussed everything with my board, and they're very supportive of training and, getting into as many workshops and everything to learn from other leaders that have teams and how they're handling it. And, for us, and as the nonprofit sector as a whole, keeping equity front and center as all of this we start to emerge and reopen is super important, because while we're all kind of in this together and we're experiencing the same thing, it's really not the case. We have to maintain our people-minded approach to programming. And I think that the way that Long Island Arts Alliance has kind of handled this is we're reaching out, and just as Kate was saying, you spoke directly to your staff members. I've been speaking directly to our community leaders and arts leaders in that are serving BIPOC communities and artists living in there who have been made unemployed, and how we can work to create cross-sector collaborations to help keep this DEI and inclusion going in the arts. So for me, it's been a lot about outreach and listening, because I think that's the number one thing you can do. But yes, as a party of one, it's been a really welcomed project for me to incorporate and figure out ways to work DEI into our mission.
Yeah, I find that it's the nonprofit sector that really drives a lot of these social change issues. So really, you guys are the leadership that's really going to hopefully push this forward, towards acceptability across all platforms.
I liked during the diversity section as well. There was discussion not just about, different races, ethnicities, male versus female gender identity, also responsibilities as a parent or a family member or a caregiver. Those are all issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that a person feels whole, even though they're part of a system or an organization. And so I think if we value people in that way of the person who is part of something, and really considering that person as a whole, almost like functional medicine, right? You're not treating the symptom or the situation. You're treating that person as a whole, and what does that person need to be fulfilling the mission.
Right. No, I agree. I'm going to go back to kind of, oh, Robert's coming back.
Okay.
Hey, we got you back, Robert.
He's on the panoramic screen. Yeah. That's all right.
Okay. So Robert, actually, it's good that you popped in when you did, because you were talking about, during the your first answer, you were talking about some of the regulatory changes and the regulatory overload, and the need to have that communication with governmental agencies, probably now more than ever before, because of all of the I don't know, it almost feels like a whirlwind of information. And even though the pandemic, quote unquote, is over, there's still a lot of inconsistency in terms of what the rules are going forward in a lot of the funding streams. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's beautifully framed already, Ken. So we have been aggressively advocating for new industry standards of communication and seamless efforts by our oversight bodies, in particular at an organization such as ours that serves highly complex folks. We have one individual who might relate to 3 or 4 different funding sources. So we are working through our coalitions, our advocacy groups on a federal level, on a statewide level, to try to use this opportunity to say, we continually talk about we don't have enough resources, and look at the resources that get spent on duplicative efforts. If we could just have a seamless system of communication and oversight that shared certain commonalities on certain core issues, such as safety and access to PPE and service delivery, et cetera, we could be much more effective and efficient, and then reinvest those dollars into direct service delivery. When you have a fear-based system that often regulates to the one-offs, the exception, rather than to the belief that all people are contributing citizens that can, when based on strengths, make a valuable contribution to their local community, you get this kind of fragmentation.
Okay, so theoretically, we're emerging from this pandemic. I mean, obviously, we still have concerns and issues that continue to go with this. But as we look to move back to some level of normalcy, what do you see as the key issues nonprofits need to kind of think about and focus on? Lauren, you want to start with that?
Oh boy, a lot. So obviously, fundraising has taken a big hit, especially in our sector. Memberships have gone down. Funding is the biggest issue facing our sector right now. But at the same time, we have to look at, the human components of what makes up this sector. So, creative employment, I believe it was upwards of 300,000 New York creative jobs were lost during the pandemic, and disproportionately larger numbers of the BIPOC community. So it's important that we are able to communicate that, first responders save lives, second responders help put those lives back together. And I think the arts and artists are essential workers in that regard. So right now we have to figure out ways to communicate that, to vie for funding, and to bring those jobs back in a sustainable way, and utilize the power of the arts to help the entire community rebuild. So that's, for us and our sector, it's finding ways to communicate that it's not just art for art's sake. It's not a fringe, that we are essential, and we can help recovery efforts from, local policymakers and government and state entities. So
before I throw that question out to everybody else, just to follow up on that, you mentioned that, you've had a loss of funding and everything else. How do you get your supporters back?
I'm sorry?
How do you get your supporters back?
Ooh. So I think one of the really beautiful things about at least the arts and culture sector is the creativity that they showed when everything went dark, when their theaters were closed and screens went dead. And I mean, many of them are still shuttered. So that constant engagement, not harping on the negative, not saying, oh, we lost so much money and data and da-da-da. No, it's about focusing on the future and the lessons that the pandemic has taught us and the ways in which we're able to re-engage local communities. In my mind, arts and culture and tourism is very, very connected. There's no doubt about it. Tourism, international tourism is still going to be very affected this summer and into our popular fall months. So taking the time to engage and focus on your local community, that is going to be so impactful. And the other thing that I think is really great, and I've mentioned it before, and I'll probably mention it again, is cross-sector collaborations. For example, we partnered up with a few other arts councils on the island, some local policymakers, business leaders, and members of the public health sector. And we put together a vaccine awareness and confidence marketing campaign by putting out a call to artists. We got over 150 submissions from artists aged 5 to seasoned professional artists. We utilized all of our resources to then create this beautiful, marketing campaign, which is launching soon. We have 6 beautiful posters that were created. We leveraged and combined all of our resources in a way that made a statement and it was purposeful when it went out to the community. And I think by having those kinds of that kind of movement and that progression, even while you're dark or unable to perform as you normally would be able to do, I think that looks really good. So not harping on the negative, focusing on the future and focusing on the community, I think that's the best way to bring up at least individual and foundation support. Government support is all another story, and I'm sure you guys all can speak to that as well.
Theresa, what do you see as the key focuses that nonprofits need to focus on?
Robert's there I'll start with technology, right? So technology, building the capacity. A lot of our staffs, right, have been remote, and being able to very sort of quickly move. I know inside, for us, thank God, inside of the first 2 weeks, we had the entire operation remote if it needed to stay that way, all the financial structures. And so really that investment in capacity and in staffing and in structure is an important integration. So for instance, for us, we're an organization that operates on an overhead of about 15%. So if you give the United Way $1, 85 cents moves to the program side of the operation, 15% is in the administration side. So you almost as a leader have to develop more of a strategic thought pattern that says, hey, the tolerance of the organization, whether in certain years we were at 13, 14, or 15%, if we always kept our overhead at 15% and then made 2 cents as an investment in technology, and if we did that over 5 years, where would we be? Every organization could do this on its own level. It's the way in which you pretty much incorporate what's important. And, technology, capacity, staffing, compensating staff. I know there are still a lot of organizations that do not have a pension. It's really, it's not the word criminal isn't the right word, but we've got to protect our staff. We've got to make sure that is an important way that we demonstrate as leaders to support our employees in the sector. And we also need to redouble our efforts to make sure that that protection is there, their retirement, their benefits, their healthcare plans, their dental plans. I mean, that is the responsibility that I take very personal to make sure that I'm going to bat for every single employee. Often, and really talking to foundations and funders about the importance of that investment. And you've got to put that up front. So I think for the sector, and the key issue that we have to focus on is just, our staffing, technology, capacity, and incorporating now, obviously, all our new clients, because all of us have a lot of people in front of us that potentially were not in front of us a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So that's got to build that capacity.
I was going to say that brings up two issues. First of all, when you have a uptick in technology and you're working more remotely like we've been, that opens up a lot more avenues for potential concerns. And you need to make sure that you have good, proper backup on your technology, so that if something goes down because of storms or anything else, and then you also have proper protection on your technology, because the amount of cyber crimes have been completely increasing. We've had a bunch of our nonprofit clients get hit with cyber issues. So cybersecurity has to remain a big issue. And then, as you mentioned, and I agree with the salary issues, but the hard part then is, you're dealing with, and Robert, you know this better than anyone else, you're dealing with limited funding coming in from government sources. There's only so much you can supplement it through raising activities. How do you, and Theresa, I know you said you have to advocate for it, but how do you go about understanding and getting the appropriate salaries when right now there's a shortage of staff, specifically at the lower levels, and you have major competition with for-profit businesses? So.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, nationally, there's a direct support shortage. In 2019, the lines crossed, so there's no longer enough people coming into the human service field to meet the demand. So that's not a Long Island specific issue, or even a New York State specific issue. That's just a reality we have to deal with. So if we don't invest in the alternate solutions, we're always going to be in an impossible catch-up game. The demographics just clearly paint the picture that it's not a matter of recruitment and retention. There is a structural problem in the system we have to update our set of assumptions so that we are addressing the right solution. Otherwise, we're just putting Band-Aids on a structure that's going to crumble. And I think there's been a significant shift. I love, in other sessions that you've provided, Ken, you talk about the shift from looking at not-for-profits as a charity versus a true community partner offering solutions. And I think that's part of the advocacy that we have to do on both the federal and state level in order to have the systems catch up to the supports that we all currently need. And technology bought in bulk is always much less expensive. So having all these fragmented systems, for an agency such as ours, we have 7 very expensive, in order to have electronic health records, we have very expensive systems that we have to replicate, rather than having one universal one that would go across all funding sources. It's a very very basic example, but a very expensive example of resource commitment to an agency that wants to do the right thing, wants to be part of moving forward in the modern world. And we're always looking for solutions, such as the little owl that's not working. That's only $1,000, but obviously we might need the $5,000. We might need the eagle instead of the owl. I nicknamed this the monkey, and I think that was apropos of this experience. But but there are, in all seriousness, there's the Technology Disability of Rights that was formed about, I guess, 5 years ago now, in partnership with the Coleman Institute out of the University of Colorado. And it basically states that people who are differently abled, or perhaps the people who are most in need of the technology that each of us take for granted on a daily basis, and yet our funding streams won't allow the reimbursement of what we all take for granted. And I dare say most of us would consider our iPhone or our smartphone, whatever phone you have, as part of a basic necessity nowadays in order to be forget about being competitive, just being part of today's world.
Yeah, and that's been a big issue in terms of trying to find ways to implement technology from the very beginning as part of the goals, establishment of goals for individuals with disabilities. How do you incorporate technology right from the very beginning so that it improves their overall quality of life, which is ultimately what you're trying to achieve. So, Kate, did you want to add anything in terms of what nonprofits need to focus on?
Well, I loved what Lauren said about the cross-sector collaboration. On one side, pretty simple. What any of us hasn't leveraged music as a way of motivating ourselves to a task, or created some piece of artwork to express ourselves. I think arts is essential. Going back to what you said, in terms of crossing that over to food, food I consider as a piece of art, as a means of meditating, and even recently, we've been talking amongst our team as the peak season comes and we're receiving thousands of pounds of produce into the kitchen to get to the food pantries or back to the farms, really dedicating ourselves to how that food was created, and staying connected. So related to coming out of the pandemic, I think we all felt disconnected from each other in many ways, but connected to our basic necessities, which could be art, which could be food, which could be family and friends. And just remembering what that felt like and really appreciating and slowing down a bit, and not getting back into the day-to-day hamster wheel effect, so that we can really notice what is important, and again, not only address those emergency issues, but take this opportunity where we all felt all the issues that we've been working on, Theresa and Robert and myself and Lauren, every one of those issues got a spotlight during the pandemic. Everyone felt the pain around those issues, and we can't lose that realization. We need to invest in solutions for the long term.
So coming out of the pandemic, and Kate, since you have the floor, coming out of the pandemic, what are you most excited about and what are you most concerned about as we move to the next normal?
I guess really for me, it's traveling, if we're speaking in metaphors, traveling on this current bumpy road while paving the road ahead simultaneously. For us, the biggest challenge is, maintaining operating support and cash flow to keep the day-to-day running, while also applying for long-term funding to invest in infrastructure for a food hub that will enable us to get foods to the food pantry, benefit the farms, make sure kids in schools are eating great local high-quality produce, and also serving natural assets and tourism. So, we took a back seat on purpose to provide support to our local food pantry partners. And so, East End Food Institute, we took grant funding in where we needed it during the pandemic to sort of hold tight and let those emergency needs happen. And, now we're looking to fill that gap with additional support from the community. And, my days and many nights are spent applying for USDA grant funding to fill in community food needs. Just simultaneously addressing the now and planning for the future. And, to Theresa's point, realizing that when you look at an organization's 990 as a donor, you have to realize that it does take time to think and plan and run an organization and advocate for staff and make sure people are trained properly. And that overhead is a really good investment, especially if you have a good partnership with the management team.
Awesome. Robert, what are you most excited about and most concerned about?
I think it's the same core issue that excites me and that we're most challenged by, and that is continuing the focus we have on these systemic issues that we've been talking about for a while now. I think people's eyes were opened to why it's so important to have certain infrastructure in place, why it's important to have certain systemic change occur in order order for us to not just survive, but to actually thrive in the future. I think, to the government's credit, our field was declared as essential workers, but the discussions that took place in order for people to understand, very basic example, we have 17 programs that serve really medically frail people who are on very complex machinery to keep them alive. And so to say that we were not equivalent to other facilities serving the medically frail was just incredibly ignorant. And we, by keeping those people disease-free, kept people out of hospitals at a time that it was critical to keep people out of the hospital. But it was fascinating to watch. We had a delivery of personal protective equipment that sat on the tarmac for 3 days while we argued with our government officials as why it should not be diverted elsewhere, because we were providing medically essential service. So I think that was the most challenging part of what we've just lived through, but also the most exciting. I mean, this is the first time at a federal level we have an administration that actually knows the name of our field and knows our primary funding source and named it in legislation. It's like this interesting juxtaposition of the worst and the most exciting all wrapped up into one core issue. So we're excited and very motivated by that recent success in awareness, because I do think people still misunderstand the not-for-profit sector in general, not just our little corner of it. And I do think that there's a growing awareness of what a vital, essential element to our general community success that we all comprise. So.
Awesome. Theresa, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, so I think it's a nice time session winding down here. So I think we're most excited about the new investment that a lot of very large foundations have made. And foundations aren't necessarily here on Long Island. So we've captured the attention, maybe to the tune of $3 or $4 million of new revenue that are supporting the pandemic, all the responses, all the vaccine hesitancy programs, centers of disease control. I mean, we are skilled in the area of chasing some big support. The question is, how do we help other organizations build the capacity to do so? And it does come down to staffing. It does come down to dedicating that one person who's full-time, who is on the grant journey, because there's a big stewardship part. You get a gift for $500,000. It's not something that you then, get the check and you write the grant report every year. And you think that that's a partnership. So I think for the future, for this United Way, is how do we really help build capacity of other organizations to really get the benefit that we have in the way we have it to finance the work that's so important to be financed, because it's people, right? Our product is people. Mm-hmm. So we all want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to help the thousands and thousands of individuals in front of us. So we're most excited about the new partnerships and strengthening some of the current, and as Robert had said, people I think have a different value of the sector today that we might have had, 18 months ago. And hopefully they'll hold on to that value long term.
Lauren, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I echo what everybody said. For arts and culture, we've always been kind of faced with the fact that we're lower on the funding totem pole. So I think what I'm most excited about and what I'm most concerned about is being able to advocate for the proper funding and making sure the arts have a seat at this table. And I'm so appreciative to be here and to represent the arts and culture sector. And I think a lot of organizations and businesses and other nonprofit organizations are going to realize that they need creative thinking right now. They're going to need innovation. They need problem solving. And that's something that our creative community can offer. So, once again, the collaborations and things that I've learned from other organizations and other, serving other needs and social impact have been really helpful in guiding what the Long Island Arts Alliance does over the next year. Kind of to echo what Kate was saying about figuring out how to navigate this bumpy road right now as all of our members are starting to reopen and the shuttered venue operators grants are finally starting to get approved. There's a lot of hustle and bustle, and we're trying to promote events, and we're trying to help this sector, blossom again. But at the same time, we have to keep an eye on the road ahead and what's sustainable for our organization. And I think that the future of our sector really hinges on the next year, 2 years. Of how we can incorporate the arts into every recovery effort possible. So.
Yeah, I think 2022 is going to be a very pivotal year because that'll get you past most of the government funding that you've gotten. And then the question is, can you stand on your own 2 feet? And now, the government doesn't have, Robert, as you know, doesn't have all those big extra funds that the federal government's thrown their way. And, some of those cuts that they were thinking about in the past may find their way back onto the table. So it's going to be a very, very, challenging year once we get past 21, and into 2022. And Lauren, I mean, you got the added challenge of being, in the shadow of New York City. So, you've got, a lot of the funding that goes to the arts finds its way to New York City. And, it's tough to kind of get that back here to the island where it belongs and really getting the community to understand that community arts is equally as important as world-class art.
Mm-hmm. And those conversations have to happen now. So I've gone to our county executives and as many legislators as possible just to say, hey, make sure we don't get looked over when it comes to funding dedicated to the arts. Like, you need to make us a priority because we can help you in this way and that way. We've gone to them and said, hey, we're the experts on this. Let us help you, revive your economy and your communities. So yes, it's always been difficult being in the shadow of New York City, particularly when it comes to creative sector. But I think that once again, just having those conversations and making sure they know about what we're doing here on the island has definitely helped. And I'm hoping that we'll see some support from our county executives soon.
Awesome. So first of all, we're running out of time. We got about a minute left. So I want to thank everybody. You guys all did an amazing job. You gave a lot of insight into kind of what's happening here in the nonprofit sector, and hopefully everybody got a lot out of this. If anybody wants to kind of follow through and talk to some of our panelists or talk to some of the speakers that have been on around today, head over to the lounge. We're going to be there for about 15-20 minutes, just answering any questions that you have. I want to thank everybody for coming. We're going to be sending around evaluation forms to everybody. Please just take the time to fill them out. It goes a long way in helping us to really understand what it is you guys want from us as information, so we can continue to give you the right content and have the right speakers going forward. In addition, if anybody needs continuing professional education as a CPA, because we're accountants, just let us know and we will make sure you get the continuing education. So we're going to basically be cut off in a matter of seconds. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Hopefully everybody enjoyed today and got some good information out of it. And we'll see you over at the lounge. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you. Good luck.